Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Abdul Rahman. What I want to say, my first question was that they say no explanation is meaningful unless it's empirically verified, instead of saying no claim statement is meaningless, which is self-refuting. Yes, they say no explanation is meaningful. So how do you refute that? That's a difficult. That's interesting, right? Because now it's no longer really a statement, right? But then you could also ask, well, how do you make that statement meaningful? And you can kind of dissect it in this way. Like I say, you can ask, well, if the explanation is only meaningful based on science, then why is the statement meaningful? And if they give you a reason why, then ask them why you're not being consistent in that respect. Why is it that the statement is saved, but the explanation is not? See what I'm saying? Why are you using two different criteria here? Okay, are the logical truths themselves a priori because they too are analytic? What makes them so? Okay, I hate to say this because I'm going to be opposing some of the other people you've spoken to or you've learned from, but I don't believe logic is a priori. I believe logic is language. That's it. I believe that we can have inclinations. Like, I believe, for instance, that the fitrah is an inclination towards belief in God. I believe that there's an inclination towards causation, like a perspective. You know what I mean? Like, I can see causation, but a belief or a logical formula being innate, that doesn't make any sense. Like, if I told you the law of non-contradiction, you don't really understand what that is. I mean, you can perceive it, but if I told you what it was the first time in your life, you wouldn't get what I'm saying. If I showed you the logical formulation of that, you would not understand, right? I'd have to teach it to you. But you are inclined to it. You're inclined to naturally perceive the world as not contradicting itself. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I would not say that logical truths are a priori, because logical laws, logical truths, you know what I mean, aren't really, those are things that we write. Those are things that we have expressed through language. If logic is reduced to language, is language a priori then? I don't think language is a priori either. Everyone's like, why? I'm sorry. I ruined your day, I know. I'm out of water. Oh, goodness. It does. Trust me. If you guys are freaking out because something's not a priori, don't. There's nothing. Something doesn't have to be a priori to be true or to be axiomatic in some respect. Like like your fitrah is not based on whether or not it's a priori. Your fitrah is your fitrah. It's all you have. You can take a more consequentialist approach in saying that, okay, well, this is all I have to perceive the world. Like, your brain is what you get, right? You're created with this brain. So this is all you have. So you can't be like, is this true or not? You know what I mean? Is this justified? Like, what other criteria are you going to use? You see what I'm saying? Like, well, you can't go outside of your brain and say, does my brain work? No, you don't know. Like, that's all you have. How's my health? Alhamdulillah, I'm doing okay. I'm recovering. As you can see, I'm not exactly up to par still, but I'm working on it. Could you please expand on your comment on Antinu's reason on becoming a deist not good enough? I don't believe physical observation of the world can directly infer God. That's why. Similarly, I don't believe that finding scientific miracles in the Quran is a good reason, because I believe science does not operate in that fashion. You cannot find science in the Quran because science is constantly changing. Doesn't make any sense. What are your views on Paul Farabin's on scientific anarchism? What is his place in the philosophy of science? His place in the philosophy of science was very interesting because he completely tries to undermine everyone else's position. He's the most annoying. He's one of those really annoying philosophers that comes around and just goes, "Hey, all of you guys, you're all wrong, and I don't know if I'm right, but you're all wrong." He's that guy. He's wrong, I think, and I think everyone else thinks he's wrong. But he asked a lot of interesting questions, which helped the philosophical community flesh out their theories better. So he was sort of that guy who came along and poked you enough to make you have a better position. What argument do you use for the existence of God other than the fitrah? Other than the fitrah, I don't like those arguments. I don't like many other arguments other than that, to be honest. I suppose I would say the teleological argument is the best one you can get. But, I mean, every argument can be challenged to some degree. That's the problem. Because no one has absolute knowledge. Now, I would probably say that, yeah, the teleological argument is probably the best. The design argument, I mean. Like, everything looks designed, therefore it must be designed. And people say, well, that's very simple. Just because it looks designed doesn't mean it's designed. But then if you argue, well, if that's the only way I can look at it, how can you say otherwise? That's when you kind of combine the two, the fitra. It's like, well, I can't say it's not designed because my perception doesn't allow me to say otherwise. I see everything as designed. I can't do anything else about it. So what am I supposed to do? It's like if you tell somebody you live in the Matrix, well, I don't see the Matrix. What am I going to do about it? You know? What about contingency argument? Like Al-Ghazali's contingency arguments? Like I said, guys, a lot of the arguments that you're mentioning, Kalam and such like this, these, for me personally, are arguments that help to solidify the belief of the believer. They don't help with atheists. If you want to deal with an atheist, you have to go after their beliefs first. You have to undermine their perception of science and their perception of reason and truth. Okay? You're not going to win against an atheist with these arguments. I'm sorry. I know that's my personal view. You don't have to agree with me, but in my experience with atheism over the years, it doesn't work. Because unless you destroy their foundations first for what they perceive to be as evidence and reason, you're not going to get anywhere. They can just keep denying your arguments because they're not scientifically based, right? You first need to understand. This is why I said this lecture is the most important one. And the next one you have is going to be even more important, or hopefully, because I think Ustaz Hamza is going to be mentioning how science and Islam don't contradict. And he might go into more depth in this respect. But you need to understand these beliefs. You will not get anywhere with atheists or atheism unless you understand what science and scientism are. You just can't. It's not possible. Difference between knowledge and beliefs. It's a good question, and we're going to get into that lecture at a later point in my lecture on Is Islam Logical? I'm going to be explaining what justification is and warrant are, etc., and what the difference between belief and knowledge are. People usually use the words belief and knowledge in a very colloquial way. And the problem with a lot of debates today, especially online, is that you have a lot of people who don't understand anything. That's what the internet has done, is there's a lot of lay people, a lot of like armchair scholars to come around and express their own views. You know, so a belief, for some people, I've noticed that atheists will use belief in a way that just means opinion. Like an opinion that like you're not certain about. But that's not what belief is. A belief is something you actually have you have an affirmation of. Like if I say I believe in evolution, it means that I think, you know, there's some content there worth adhering to, right? Or I believe in Islam, which is more important, right? It means that I believe that Islam is true. You know what I mean? So belief is not something separate from knowledge. Now, whenever you declare it that way, that means you actually know something. When you declare belief, you're declaring knowledge of the subject. So if somebody says, I believe God does not exist, they're saying that they know in some respect that he doesn't. In the same way, if somebody says, I believe God does exist, they're saying to respect that they believe that he does, right? So some people try to demarcate between the two, but it's nonsense. There is no demarcation. If you say, in my opinion, I believe that, you know, you're just saying that you know this, and you're just trying to be like going around the bush, right? It's the same thing. Or ask questions just because you want to entertain me, or vice versa. I can do a very good Richard Dawkins accent, but I don't know if I can do it right now. Let's see. Abu Faris, is the universe beginningless, as argued by many contemporary atheists, Hellenic and Arabic philosophers? No, I don't believe so. I don't believe there's any reason to believe it's beginningless. There's no reason to. I don't see a purpose behind that. I don't think the arguments are convincing. My orange juice is gone. If you have any questions about the material, please ask now. I will answer them later if you want. This is fine as well. I do expect you guys to read my article on the Yaqeen Institute so you can understand the birth of Science and Islamic Civilization. I was hoping to get to it here, but because we had explained so much and I was kind of ranting, didn't get that far. But I do expect you guys to read it. And I've also provided additional reading material. I want you guys to pick up this book. You can get it online in PDF if you want. But I prefer to have hardbacks for especially important books like this. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. This is the 3rd edition. I believe it's the 4th edition now. It's a little bit dry. But if you really want to understand Thomas Kuhn and how revolutionary his beliefs are in terms of science and what he did to change the world, because he did change the world in terms of how science is understood. And maybe not among the normal population, but among scholars, among people who actually, study science, he was the big deal. It's a very short work. It's only a couple hundred, maybe, let me see. It's like 200 pages, but big script. Okay. It's quite a dry, but he explains his theory, he explains paradigms, he explains everything. And I think it'll open your eyes a lot more. I'm hoping that this lecture was a good primer for you, that you learned a lot, that you understood some things. I hope you go and find more information about the people that I mentioned, about the ideas that I mentioned. I hope you ask more questions in the future. And I hope that you enjoyed and benefited from this lecture. I apologize there wasn't much Islamic material in here. The problem is that we're focusing on a subject that needs a lot of attention in order for you to ascertain atheist thought. And unfortunately, a lot of Islamic scholars today do not have the tools necessary to do that. So we need to kind of start ascertaining this at a higher level. And I need to really focus on these aspects only. So I apologize for that if you felt a little bit underwhelmed in that respect. But I do consider this the same as I consider any of my other academic lectures. So I do hope that also my lack of health was not a detriment as well. Let's see. I will answer the rest of these questions, and then we can leave it at that. Excuse me. Mohammed Zia. Before this lecture, I thought it was Kant who first rejected pure reason or made pure reason a supplement to empirical science. But this lecture makes it seem like the rejection of pure reason was more of an accumulative effort. It was more of, a discussion between philosophers, starting with Descartes, Hume. Okay, Descartes came first for modern philosophy. Hume responded to Descartes. Kant responded to Hume. Hegel responded to Kant, or fulfilled Kant's, paradigm. Heidegger responded to Hegel. Okay, the analytical philosophers in the West then responded to them. Other analytical philosophers responded to them. Then you get all the way to Kuhn, and then you get Wittgenstein, then you get a bunch of other people. All these philosophical ideas are all responses to each other. That's the funny thing. It's not like they all come out of thin air. Everyone's responding to everyone else. To what degree can the Kuhnian paradigm shifts be applied to religion on non-fundamental issues? A lot. He didn't intend for that to happen, but the Kuhnian concept of paradigm has been applied everywhere since he invented it. Sociology and religion. Another individual by the name of Hans Kuhn, not Kuhn, but Kuhn, a Catholic theologian, wrote a number of books using paradigms or Kuhn's thesis in order to understand religious concepts. You don't have to agree with him, but I think it's very fascinating. You should read those if you want. How do we show atheists that they can't justify reason to begin with when they criticize Islam? First, you have to undermine their understanding of science. If you can show that they can't justify the reason through science, then what's the point in doing anything else? They are technically using the reason to justify their scientific understanding. It's just that their scientific understanding doesn't justify their reason. It doesn't work that way. So they're just shooting themselves in the foot. What do you think about Plantinga's argument against naturalism? I think it's very clever. It's a very clever argument. I think it has a lot of merit, but I think he needs to work on it a little bit more. I'm not very convinced about his idea about warranted. I don't like his idea about basic beliefs. That's the thing that I really have contention with. I think he's being very circular. I think a better source would be Michael Huemer, Huemer. He came up with an interesting concept called phenomenal conservatism. phenomenal conservatism. Okay, where he basically states that um, we're justified to believe something if we perceive it to be that way until more data comes in that defeats that perception, which to me seems very commonsensical, because that's how we normally act anyway. What do Western philosophers say about testimony or mass transmitted information as a source of knowledge? It's obviously required. Ijma in Western philosophy can be challenged, but generally it's accepted, especially with regard to scientific understanding and experiments in normal science, as it were. That said, ijma can be challenged if the interpretation is not validating the observations. So, for example, if every scientist, if 99% of the scientists in the world subscribe to theory, only because they don't have a better alternative, and their theory is starting to accumulate all these problems, and then a 1% come along and say, hey, we got this new idea, then in that sense, they can challenge them. You see what I'm saying? So it's more holistic. It's not, there's not one criteria or the other that can challenge the ijma. It has to be, there's a holistic, you see, the problem is that I have with a lot of philosophy, modern philosophy, not necessarily contemporary, but modern philosophy, is that there's demarcation between the objective realm and the subjective. Whereas, you know, in the Islamic tradition, especially, and even in contemporary philosophy, that's not the case. The objective and the subjective are not different. In fact, they're very much the same, because, like I said, you can't really demarcate them. I mean, the only perspective you have is your own, right? And you can only confirm it with others. You can't just like jump into other people's brains. Isn't basic belief similar to fitra? No, it's not. I'm not going to get into that too, but it's not. He uses fitri sort of arguments, but it's not similar. Not in my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's not according to me. I studied under when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I studied under one of the students of Plantinga. He was my supervisor. And, you know, he confirmed to me a lot of his ideas. I became interested in Plantinga during that time, but I didn't agree with him necessarily. What is the difference between Plantinga's performed epistemology and fitra argument? Fitra argument deals primarily with natural inclination, whereas Plantinga tries to establish beliefs in such a way that they're sort of like what's the word? It's not necessarily based on intuition. Let me just put it that way. Like fitra arguments are based on intuitionist beliefs, or the concept of intuitionism, whereas Plantinga is like non-reducible, self-evident ideas, right? Like foundational views, foundational beliefs. Whereas the fitra is not a foundational belief. The fitra is an inclination. It's a state of being. It's a state of perceiving. It's not a belief in and of itself. Do you understand? That's the difference. So Plantinga is like, this is basic beliefs. Fitra, not beliefs. Perception, inclination. Not according to me. Fitra is not, for me, fitra is an inclination towards belief in God. It's not a belief in and of itself. When you were born as a baby, you do not believe, you don't have a concept of God in your head. If you're a baby, do you understand what, can you comprehend mercy? You can perceive it. You see what I'm saying? Like you can experience it, but you can't tell me what it is as a baby. You don't understand. You don't even understand what a word is, right? Is there an Islamic epistemology? There are many. Ghazali was one epistemologist who came up with a sort of first type of empiricism within the Islamic tradition. Ibn Taymiyyah was also very much an empiricist in many ways, not completely, but in many ways. Ibn Hazm was probably the greatest empiricist in our tradition. Very good philosopher as well. How do we get good at recognizing fallacies? Practice. Practice not making them. Try spotting them as well. Like if you study a fallacy, say like, what is an ad hominem, and then look for them. It's practice. The same thing as language. How do you get good at that? You got to practice. There's so many fallacies, but you can catch them over time. It takes practice. You got to debate more as well. Not like in a bad way. I don't want you going around yelling at people, but you know what I mean? Like have more discussions with people so you can see how people practice their arguments, and then practice your own. Make sure you're not trying to commit any. The first thing you should do is you always have integrity. Most people who commit fallacies are people who don't have any integrity. They're people who just want to win a discussion. That's the problem. So that's why they commit so many fallacies. Do you have, anonymous attendee, assalamu alaikum, do you have reading material English on Islamic epistemology? Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah. Yes. The best person to look at right now for contemporary Ghazalian epistemology would be Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, Muhammad Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, who is Malaysian. He wrote the Prolegomena of Islamic Metaphysics, or Prolegomena of Islamic Science. I forgot the exact title, but I know it's Prolegomena. Just look up Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, Malaysian philosopher. You will find his work. He's very contemporaneous in that sense. In terms of the pragmatist tradition, it would be Ziauddin Sarder. Ziauddin Sarder, excuse me. He is a pragmatist Islamic philosopher. I don't agree with him, by the way, on all his Islamic beliefs, but his philosophy in terms of science is very good. So once again, thank you again. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.